Friday. Actually, no, he's saying you have bought. How much it comes?
Fair.
$10.
It's just fair. Fair. You know what I mean?
Kia tau tono te rangi Māori e Otingariki kia koutou. Let us pray. Gracious God, we pray your blessing upon this city. We pray for your worship, the mayor, the councillors and staff of this city. We pray for all its citizens. We remember all those who live on the borders of our society, those who struggle to make ends meet. We pray your blessing, Lord God, on all discussions this day, that they may bring peace, harmony, and be for the good of all the people of this city. Through Christ our Lord we pray. Amen.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome back, Councillor Westphal. Hope you had a good trip, and we're pleased you're back. So I'd like to now open the council meeting for Thursday, the 27th of October 2011. So the first item on the agenda is apologies, and we have no apologies. Second item is confirmation of the agenda. So it's as stated in our papers. Just to let councillors know that item 9, we have a presentation at 10:45, immediately after morning tea. And item 14, in respect to the VA audit, the auditor will be here at 1:30. So I'll move the agenda as the seconder for that. Councillor O'Leary, all those in favour? No. Carried. Third item, declarations of conflict of interest. Are there any declarations? No? Okay. Next item is the public forum, which is an opportunity for any member of the public to address the council. Are there any members of the public that will be speaking in the public forum? No? Thank you. Right, the next item on the agenda is confirmation of minutes. So I will move the council meeting minutes of Thursday the 29th of September 2011 and Friday the 30th of September 2011. All those in favour?
I'll second it.
Oh, sorry, Councillor Hennery seconding. All those in favour?
No.
Carried. The extraordinary council meeting for the 6th of October 2011, I'll move those. The seconder, Councillor Mahut. All those in favour?
No.
And the extraordinary council meeting for Tuesday the 11th of October 2011, I'll move those. Seconder, Councillor Hennery. All those in favour?
No.
And those are all carried. Okay. Right, the next item on the agenda are sealed documents. It's at page 5.
I'll move.
Thank you, Councillor Gowes. Is there a seconder for those?
I'll second.
Councillor Wilson. All those in favour? Carried. Next item on the agenda is a report in relation to Maori representation review, and that's at page 6.
Thank you, Your Worship. Anthony will introduce this.
Okay.
Your Worship, we've got the Maori representation review report. Tegan McIntyre will be joining me shortly to discuss the consultation which took part with the wider community. I'll take the report as read, but the 3 options available to elected members today is that no change to the current arrangements, and that is currently we don't have a Maori ward. That option 2 being council decides to introduce Maori wards within Hamilton city boundaries. And then option 3 being council decides to undertake a poll regarding the introduction of Maori wards. The current legislation at the moment says that council has to make a decision by 23rd of November to take that effect for the next triennial election. There is a equation in terms of Hamilton City's population, which, given the number of Maori members, the Maori electoral population, taken in the mix with the general electoral population, and that would give Hamilton City 2 members on our existing 12 councillors. So there's an equation which we then have to adhere to if we did introduce Maori representation, which we cannot defer from. We obviously have the right to demand a poll. That poll then would be held before February, and then that would be a binding poll and then decided upon whether in fact the Maori wards were introduced or not. And that was similar then to the STV issue which we discussed 2 months ago. In terms of the consultation, I can talk before Tegan arrives. We took a 3-part approach to it. There was, we held a Maori forum in September in which Maori organisations, individuals were invited. We explained the process which was available for them in terms of the Maori ward being available, in terms of the time frame, and obviously giving them opportunity for feedback. We also utilised the City News in terms of inviting people to comment whether they thought it was appropriate that there was a introduction of a Maori ward, and they are also asked on comments on other mechanisms to achieve effective Maori representation. Third part was a citizens panel which we utilised, sent out, which you'll see the results on page 13, which asked Maori then, the citizens panel a variety of questions which we got feedback from, which we've given an analysis of from page 13 onwards. Although there's not a huge number of return from the actual citizens panel, it comes out in terms of, in principle, do you support the concept? The general census on there is that in fact they either strongly oppose or oppose the situation. We have asked in terms of for our relationships in terms with Maori. Unfortunately, they have been involved with their funding exercise at the moment, and we've received no formal feedback from them. We invited them all. I was hoping Keegan would be able to provide something to add more further to that, but we've asked for formal feedback which we haven't received. Here to take any questions, Your Worship.
Okay, Councillor Bell.
Yes, thank you, Anthony. Is it so that if we wished, we could increase the number of councillors in a further later discussion?
Is this in terms of Maori or into... no, sorry?
Generally. Increase the size of council.
Correct, yes. Next year we will do a representation, but at the moment our population as it stands, we have... the equation still sits at 12 councillors. So no, we cannot increase our general councillors per se.
Okay, Councillor Hennebrain.
Yes, thank you. My question is that you didn't mention the feedback from the City News and the Maori Forum, and I see here that the results are pretty much the same as the citizen panel, which is quite a large, if you like, majority against. If we wanted to go out and do a poll with STV, etc., we have to make a decision by 28th of December?
If we wish to have a poll and we wish to include it for the next triennial election, we've got to make a decision by the 23rd of November.
23rd of
Yeah.
November. Thank you.
And then by February we would have to hold the poll.
Okay.
Okay.
By February?
No, we wanted to introduce it into your next triennial election.
Tegan, did you, I think Anthony said you were going to add some information about the feedback. Do you need to do that?
No, the only thing I can probably add is that we had hoped to have a review from the taumata. They did in fact meet, but they had a number of other issues that they felt were a little bit more pressing that they discussed. They are planning to meet again and discuss the issue of non-representation, and if there is an opportunity we can circulate that.
So there's no updated information that you can provide?
No, in terms of the citizens panel, in one writing the report we had 210 members respond to the 3 questions. I checked this morning and we've actually had another 30 or 40, so we've got 244 respondents.
And are you able to update us then on what those responses did in terms of your report?
I've checked that it hasn't actually changed overall weighting in terms of support of Māori representation in principle. We had 38% support, 27% didn't support, but then when we dig down to how that might play out in terms of Māori representation and using the electoral act options, it flips and only 23 support and 59% do not support. So you'll see in the report that citizen panel members were also asked were there any other mechanisms that they felt council could consider, and there was a range of things. There's a big grouping of people who submitted around committees, advisory boards, forums, that sort of thing. So my interpretation of those results is that people support Māori representation in principle, but don't necessarily like the electoral act option like the committee forum.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Henry, did you have another question
Yeah,
to
if
ask?
you don't mind, I know
Yes.
my second question.
Yes.
Tegan, if, and I've read that, and some saying that there is these opportunities for Māori to come on, well, they think there's opportunities for them to come on board. But my question to you is, if they can't be bothered to actually submit when we're going to make a decision now, what assurance do we have if we went down that for them turning up to any meetings?
When you say they, can you explain?
Well, okay, you actually said that they had other pressing matters and couldn't submit today on this issue. I'm saying to you, if that's the case, why should we take any other situation serious?
I think, Your Worship, that's an unfair question to ask of Tegan.
Okay, well, it's
You're asking for
a
an
thought,
opinion.
But, okay,
Yeah.
I'm asking an opinion. I'm sorry.
What Tegan's given us is the statistical response information for us to help make up our mind.
Frustrating, sorry.
Yeah, so you'd have to direct that question to them.
Yeah.
Okay, now,
Sorry,
Councillor Gower.
Yes, thank you. The citizens panel, do you think that was representative of the community? I know it was set up to be representative, but was it? Thank you. The second question is, and I'm looking at paragraph 23, and further into Councillor Bell's question. If Council decided to go down with Maori representation, and this is just a clarification if I can, so that would be 2 Maori seats,
Correct.
and the general seats would be reduced to 10.
Go to 10.
10. Now, in the future, for the general seats of 10, that would only rise, as I understand, if the percentage of population also increased.
Under current legislation, that's right.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councillor McPherson.
Yeah, I wanted a little bit more explanation from Anthony on how that panned out and related to Daphne's question as well, because my understanding was that this council previously sort of arbitrarily decided to reduce from 13 to 12 the number of councillors, and it wasn't caused by our population dropping. In fact, it had gone up at the time. So I don't quite understand why we're restricted to 12 or 10 general seats. I understand the proportion of Maori, how that fits. You know, it's around close enough to 2 out of 12 seats. I think Daphne may have been leading towards the option of, say, what if we had 14 seats and 2 were Māori and 12 general, just like we have now. I don't understand why that's prohibited, but maybe it's a timing thing.
Yes, can you answer that, Anthony?
Yes, I may be able to assist. Next year, under the representation, in terms of the councillors, there's a band which of councillors to actual electors within population of Hamilton City. At the moment, the equation sits at 12 councillors. If you're wanting to say increase it to 14, the equation there may not work in terms of councillors to total population of Hamilton.
Is that a new amendment to the Electoral Act? Because that doesn't sort of explain why we were able to go from 13 down to 12, why we were able to legally be on 13.
Which, because that was still within our banned council person before, in terms there. Now, by going up, if we went up, that at the moment would go outside our band of ratio between councillors and population of Hamilton City.
So could we go back to 13 then?
We may get that may work, yes, that could work.
So I'm just trying to tease out the maths of that.
I think it's a good line of questioning. So just to help me, can you clarify? We're within a band. What is the maximum number of councillor seats we can have in our band?
There's not a maximum amount of elected members.
In our band?
There's a band of ratio between elected members and population of Hamilton. At the moment, we're sitting right with our 2 wards, 6 east, 6 on the west side.
Yes.
And that works at the moment.
And is that the maximum? We've currently got the maximum number we can have with that population.
Yes. Now, we obviously next year we review that actual representation. But if at the moment we would not be within that scope, for want of a better word, of that.
Right.
Sorry, Your Worship, I'm more confused now. To be honest, I would like to see some documents relating to the Act, I think, because I still, if the Act hasn't changed, and we were sitting on 13 before quite legally, members, then I can't see why, for instance, we couldn't go back to that, even despite Anthony's answer, except we may not be able to at this time of the year.
Yes,
I think just to clarify, Anthony, the legislation pertaining to the formula hasn't changed, as I'm aware. The appropriate time to determine that is the representation review next year in September. Without looking at the numbers, if we were in a band that might have allowed between 12 and 13 at the last time we reviewed it, that's quite conceivable that will still apply when we review it this time. And I think, because the formula looks at 2 parts, it looks at total electors, or total electors and total number of councillors, and then of course it looks at the ward ratios as well. And so when we last looked at it, I think the formula worked that you could have 6 on the west, 6 on the east, but I potentially might have allowed 12 or 13 if you went citywide. This is from memory. And I suspect that will be somewhere similar to where it sits again when we do the ratios. But that appropriate time is September next year, Anthony, isn't it?
You have to have it completed by August next year.
So at the moment, the decision for council is if you wish to have Māori representation, the formula allows or prescribes 2 seats. That'll be 2 out of currently 12, but it may be 2 out of whatever the number is when we review it by August next year.
Does it prescribe 2 seats, or could it allow, for instance, 1 seat and 6 on each side of the river? Seats?
No, the formula is very clear that if you have Māori representation, it works on the formula in the Act.
Okay.
Right, okay. So that help clarify matters?
It does. You wish I had another question of Tegan, if that was all right, to do with the citizens' panel responses, Tegan. You've added the extra 34 responses into your percentages. I think this was 210 before, up to 244. But just listening to you, you said that's now 38% support principle, which is a bit up from the original 210. So it's sort of implying that the later answers coming in are more supportive of Māori representation, and the same for support for Māori seats has gone up slightly as well, and the other opposition's dropped slightly in each case. And we're not quite at half responses yet. So it's not all that conclusive if we have the whole lot in. The trend.
The survey has been closed, so that's the total for that.
Yeah, but in terms of representation, you said the overall panel of 500? So,
the poll that we go out to is actually
1,000.
1,000. But we, with the number that we have the ability to weight the sample to make it fully representative. So in the past 2 surveys that we've done, we've had to supply some weighting. We have over-representation of male and female wood fibre plants. So, but when we
Like
apply,
this council.
so when we apply that weighting, it just varies things slightly, but it doesn't change the overall.
So you've applied the weighting to this, so it is, as far as you're concerned, as representative as you could get.
Yes, and the margin of error of plus or minus.
Oh, yeah, okay.
Thanks.
All right, that's good. Thank you. Councillor Gowder, do you have another question?
Yes, thank you. Probably further to my last question, probably to Anthony, this formula fits in neatly with the 2-ward system. If we went back to 4 or 5 wards, how would that proportion actually be, bearing in mind it wouldn't fit neatly into the 12 or perhaps 13? Does that ratio alter because of maybe 5 wards instead of the 2 that we've got at the moment?
We would still have the 2 Maori seats, but as you say, it wouldn't fit entirely with 5 wards if we went back to a 5-ward system.
Correct. Well, how do we go then? And this is just a hypothetical question because I'm still...
Are you talking, Councillor Gowder, about wards versus at large?
No, I'm talking about the methodology for the total number of seats. And I'm now putting in a scenario that, okay, if we go away from the 2-seat thing, I'm challenging the scenario, obviously. And if we went to a more than a 2-ward system, then it wouldn't work out as neatly as we've got in the paper here. And that option obviously is over to us. So would we still, how would we go then? Would we increase it by amount of seats, but may end up at, say, 2.8 seats on a particular ward?
Yeah, no, my understanding, you would still have the 2 Maori seats, but
Yes.
in fact, you would still obviously then have, depending on the population of your individual wards, you would then have general, you would have more vacancies on your general wards, then it wouldn't be an even split into, obviously, two.
Correct. By this scenario then, you'd still be governed by...
We would still be governed by the formula
10
from the
general
local...
seats, is
correct,
that right?
yeah.
No matter how...
Yep, correct, yeah.
Maybe a
But it
little.
wouldn't be
I think
five.
to be clear, the Maori wards are at large. So
That's right, we haven't got an east-west.
So the 2 would be across
I
the city.
appreciate that.
And then you go through a representation review, and it might say hypothetically that you still only have 12 council seats a city, or you might have 13. And council then has to make a decision as to what ward structure, if any, it wishes to apply.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Now I've got Councillor Boss and Councillor Bell, then the Deputy Mayor.
Anthony, one question. Is there any way that we can go back from the 2-ward system back to citywide voting?
Yes, there is.
Okay, thank you. And just confirm for me that anything we do now is putting in process what will happen in 2013.
Correct.
Thank you.
Okay, Councillor Bell.
Thank you. Just getting back to the population and possible increase in the number of councillors, what effect does the absence of a census that was scheduled have on, how do we estimate population these
They
days?
take it at the last census, Councillor.
Okay. Deputy Mayor.
Thanks, Your Worship. Just, I know you've answered the question, but I just want to get clear in my mind. This council has no ability to decide one Maori seat citywide.
No, the current legislative requirements would appoint 2 councillors for a Maori ward.
Okay. Right, any other questions from councillors? No? Yes?
Just further to, I think, with Daphne's question about the census issue, my understanding was that they provide updated every 30th of June sub-national population estimates.
Yep,
Don't they use them?
It's the total population, it's the census that available, the most current census available, Councillor McPherson.
But Department of Statistics provide.
That's the figures we get from them, correct? That's right.
But our figures, like there'll be 30th of June 2011 figures available now, subnational population estimates. They're on their website, and they use that for other statistical purposes. So, I mean, the point being that Hamilton's population has grown faster than most other centres during the last 5-6 years.
Yes, so Councillor McPherson, what exactly is
Well,
your
I'm just
question?
saying it may put us in a higher category of seats. I don't know whether that's
I think what Anthony is saying is that the legislation prescribes how the calculation is to be made,
It's on the
and it's
current
based
census,
on the
yeah.
current census. And unfortunately, of course, we haven't had the one we were supposed to have. So, but yes, I understand your point. So there's no other questions, councillors. So there isn't a specific recommendation. We've been asked to consider this report. So I'm asking, is there a motion from any councillor? Is Councillor Gale?
Yeah, thank you, Worship. Just to start the debate, I'll move the status quo.
And I'll second that, Worship.
So just let me get clarity, unless...
Council retains
Yes.
status quo regarding...
So unless there is something different to the status quo remains, is what I'm saying.
Okay. So if there's no other amendments, then it's...
No.
I guess I'm asking, is that a motion you wish to put? Because the status quo prevails unless we change it.
Yes, I could probably put it another way too. There's actually no recommendation on the table at the moment.
That's right.
Apart from a whole heap of options. And one of the options that was presented to us was the status quo, and I am actually moving that particular option.
Right. Okay, as long as you understand that. So I've got a mover and a seconder. So Councillor Gale, did you want to speak to that motion?
Not at the moment, Your Worship.
Okay. Right, any other? Yes, Councillor Bell.
I'd like to move an amendment to the motion, Your Worship, and the wording as on page 6 at the bottom, that Council introduces my representation for the next two triennial elections, 2013-2016, noting electors' right to demand a poll on the matter.
Which page?
I'll second that.
Page 6.
Page 6 at the bottom.
I've added the noting.
Second, Your Worship.
It's seconded by the Deputy Mayor. So Councillor Bell, do you wish to speak to that amendment?
Yes, I would. Thank you, Your Worship. I think it's disappointing not to have had comment from Taumata, and maybe there's some learnings for Council in that, because this is a debate that only happens every few years, and it's possibly telling that we don't have that feedback as part of our debate today. I was interested in the citizens' panel comments, and I thought they covered the range of views across the community very well. They were reasonable and pretty sensible. The 60% vote against Maori representation, I think, is to be expected. And I think if we held a poll on the matter, we'd get a similar result. So why am I moving a motion for a Maori ward? I think as Pākehā we're privileged, and we do hold power, and we hold power because of our numbers. And we tend to be unwilling to share the power, particularly. And it's about majority versus minority rights. And that's the balance, and I think we struggle with it. And I would suggest that our world is changing. The Maori population is currently around 20%. It's our most significant grouping in the city, and the proportion will grow over time. And I think our world will change, and we might want to take that into account. If we look at the Eastern Bay of Plenty experience, the only council in the country with dedicated Maori ward, what we find there is that it's working well, and even the councillors who oppose the Maori ward would say that. Raywin Bennett was one of the Maori ward councillors on that body, and she has been elected chair of their strategy and policy committee. And they would say, I suggest, that the way they do business has changed as a result of that dedicated Maori input. I don't support entrenched Maori wards for this local authority. I think each community is different, but I think a two-term Maori ward option gives us the opportunity to engage better than we currently do with the Maori community and to see the difference that Maori representation would make. And I would predict that if we moved to a Maori ward, there'd be very fierce competition within the Maori community for those seats. And we would see candidates that we've not thus far seen, because for them then, I suggest it would seem worthwhile standing for council in a way that it currently isn't. So actually, I think it would lead to a more robust democracy than we currently have. We've talked about maybe increasing the number of councillors, and you may wonder what's wrong with the status quo. And you may have a different perspective from me about the status quo, but I think we're somewhat unengaged with our Maori communities. At times we're dismissive, we're not particularly proactive, we do fumble at times, myself included, I'd have to say. It feels like we're reluctant starters, and I'd like to think that we'd begin to do differently. When we do move into Maori settings, it tends to be formal occasions, more ceremonial, and I don't get a sense, generally, of real engagement. Understandably, when it's infrequent, we tend to be outside our comfort zone, and that doesn't make for robust relationships. So for me, Maori wards are an opportunity for us to engage meaningfully with our Maori community in a way that we've not done thus far, in my experience, hence my resolution.
Thank you, Councillor Bell. I've got Councillor Hennebury next.
Your Worship, obviously I don't support this. I might have supported a poll for the 2013 election, but definitely don't support this. I think that is actually what Daphne's proposing is an insult to Maori. It's an insult to anybody to have that you can have this as a right. We have 20% Asian population, and probably more when you look at the Asian across. Asia's a large area, Daphne. I don't mean one country. We have more in representing in the city, and we're not giving them that same right. Now, let me put it another way. We actually could have had 2 Maori on this council. And if Maori don't get their act together, I'm not supporting them. I'm not supporting them because they didn't come here today and give us their view. I'm not supporting them because consultation has said 60% of Hamilton on the citizen poll wouldn't support it. I suspect if you go to poll, it'd be an 80-20. I think it'd be an 80-20. But look, I was very upset at the last election. We had a candidate that just missed out. And I know from asking some Maori people, they didn't vote for him. And if they want Maori on board, they should have voted for him. They lost their opportunity, and as yet they don't deserve that opportunity. I'm totally against this because I feel I am open, and if you want a poll, and the majority here went for it, I would go with the poll and let Hamilton decide. Consultation means just that. We've lost all credibility with the regional council. The regional council went out for consultation out of 7,000 people. The majority didn't want something, but they still did it. And we're falling into that same trap. That same trap. Consultation means listening to the people out there, not your own personal views. And I suspect some people around here have a passion for what they want, and that overrides any consultation. I will listen to consultation. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Leary.
Thank you, Worship. There are parts of Councillor Hennebury's very passionate speech that I agree with. I have some... I'm a little bit uncomfortable, although I don't understand the dynamics of weighting surveys and panels, etc. But I'm very delighted that we are using our citizens panel. And I also, like Councillor Hennebury said, do, I guess, put my own weight on that. And while there was obviously quite strong support for Maori representation, when it was translated into actual seats, that support flipped. I do support, and I would like this council to go down the path of improving Maori representation, but I don't support that being translated into seats. We live in an increasingly diverse country and city ethnically, and for me the argument for race-based seats for one group based on that diversity of our country and our city is very thin. So based on those ideas, I will not be supporting the amendment.
Okay. Deputy Mayor?
Thanks, Your Worship. I'm really troubled by this issue because, in my opinion, it is the heart of racial thinking in New Zealand. And there has been a resistance to engage, and we wait until it becomes compulsory. It's ironical, isn't it, that we open today's meeting with our religious leader giving us a mihi. And we love to hear that, the lovely tone of those Maori words. So yes, we accept the mihi. And we do the kia oras, because that's kind of become a big thing, and particularly during the World Rugby Cup, kia oras are all over the place. And we talk about partnerships with Maori. We talk about it. And the word partnership is just one of those loose words that, in my view, doesn't mean a great deal. Look, I'm realistic enough to understand and know that this is not going to happen for the next 10 to 15 years, because the referendums that people are talking about will show those outcomes. Councillor Henry is right. The referendum, we should save the money because the result will be 80-20. But that doesn't make it right. And if you think about the change in New Zealand in contemporary thinking since the early 60s, the Vietnam War, it took us a long time to realise that that was wrong. Sporting ties with South Africa. And I think Councillor McPherson was even right there on the field.
Not that field, another one.
Another one. And so it took us a long time to accept that you couldn't separate those two matters. And then there's smoking. It's only been in recent years when the smokers have suddenly found that they're the ones that are ostracised and pushed in a corner as we decide that smoking is really, after all, bad for us. And then there's the attitude to gays. Now, back in the 60s, shock horror, you wouldn't talk about it. I'm not saying you, I'm just saying New Zealanders wouldn't talk about it. And yet today, we have a very fresh and open view to homosexuality. We have a chance today to be ahead of our time. And the argument is that, and Councillor Henneberg has identified it, that there are other ethnic groups, and those ethnic groups are entitled to representation. And I disagree with that, because we are talking about First Nation people, tangata whenua. And who in this room would have thought before 1995 that the government would be giving away billions of taxpayers' money in sorting out the land confiscation situation? So there's another issue where New Zealand has changed in terms of contemporary thinking. Now, Tainui lost over 1 million acres of land. So what do they get back? Yep, 170 million in some land in cash. Doesn't go anywhere near covering what that loss was. So today we can continue to stick our heads in the sand and wait until it becomes compulsory, or we can actually show leadership and vision and a true acceptance of what the word relationship means. And I think about the times when we think, oh, we need something new in the city, let's get those Maoris to carve a few things. No one actually thinks of the skill that's behind all that and the work and the cost. And so it's taken a shift in thinking to think that that is a major contribution different to the way that we work. So I think that we've got, and we've had opportunities in the past to address this, we've got an opportunity today and this is why I'm supporting Councillor Bell's motion, to make a difference and to be visionary. Thank you.
Okay. Now, Councillor Boss, did you...
Your Worship, I wish to start with two questions. One for Councillor Bell. Could she tell me the population between Pākehā and Māori in the Bay of Plenty? Have you got those figures?
One moment, please.
And while she's looking that up, for Anthony, why did the government reject Māori seats in Auckland? Can you answer that? What was their thinking?
They saw a possible better mechanism, their current 16 seats, which they introduced currently at the moment.
So there is a better mechanism, or they saw a better
Only
mechanism.
they saw.
Auckland saw a better mechanism. And I need us to think about that. Now I'll say my bit. When I was 15 years old, my mother died. My father married again when I was 16, and my stepmother is Māori. From the Bay of Plenty. Her words to me was that we are all people and we need to compete the same as all people. To put someone in a position of an underdog when they may not be an underdog is the wrong thing in my opinion, and my stepmother's opinion. I remember the words of my mentor and a great friend of Gordon's, the late Hardy Puki, who spoke many times about welfare killed my people, and he used that word many, many times. He also said that he wished to compete on the same football field as what I did, with the same rules for everyone. And although I have a huge feeling for Māoridom and respect them hugely, I also remember asking a man by the name of Kay Mirito whether I could have 5 yard start when I was in the army because I was Dutch. His answer to me, I can't use the words. And so we never looked within the military, and we still don't today. They are our warriors, and a large percentage of those people are Māori because they have that warrior breed within them. And we never looked whether we were Pākehā or we were Māori. We all wore green. We all competed on the same football paddock or the same battlefield in green. We were all one people. And so for those reasons, I think there is a better way. And it may not be seats. It may be what has happened in Auckland, so that we listen carefully and we have people there to hold our hand and to help us with those issues. I am afraid that if Roger Henneberry is right, I am afraid that when a poll happens, that it may well be the 80-20 and we've achieved nothing. We have just driven the wedge between us even further. And there may well be a better way than having 2 Māori seats. So I don't support it. Thank you.
Councillor Boss,
Worship, I have the information.
Yes. Can you provide that?
In the Eastern Bay of Plenty, the Maori population is 28%.
Thank you.
Thank you. Now, Councillor McPherson.
Yes, Your Worship. I might point out that this resolution, Councillor Foss, doesn't call for a poll. It actually calls for the seats. So that's a slight difference. So, of course, a poll may be demanded by other people, and we don't have any control over that. If Waikato Times runs another campaign like they did on STV, then we could end up with a poll whether we support that or not. But look, I do want to speak in support of Councillor Bell's resolution and what she said, and also Councillor Chesterman's words as well. I support them both very strongly. I was interested, though, and motivated to put my hand up when hearing Councillor Boss speak, particularly talking about Hari Puki and how he would have wanted to play on the same rugby team, because I recall Hari proudly telling me in Councillor Boss's hearing actually one day about when he was a Māori All Black in a separate team, Councillor Boss. And I recall thousands of us going down to the stadium to watch our little cuzzies beat the Lions.
Point of order, Your Worship. Point of order. I also represented the Waikato in a Māori rugby team.
Thank you. Also, why don't we just keep to the
I think that proves the Dutch can do anything.
So, Councillor McPherson,
yes, so I'm responding to points that were raised in the meeting before, Your Worship. Also interesting, the military points that Councillor Boss raised, some very good points, but I also recall the Māori battalion, I think in Oaklands, which was not a battalion that non-Māori were involved in, unless they were officers, of course. So I don't think his arguments, they can be taken either way, I think. One of the problems we've had, and I think it was identified by Councillor Bell on this council, is that we do not engage well with Māori, and no council in New Zealand does. I don't blame this council particularly, but just looking at our situation here, we haven't engaged well. Most Māori haven't felt it's worthwhile standing for council. And I've certainly spoken to a lot of them about why some of the leading members of the Māori community don't stand for council. Until this term, we haven't had Māori members, a Māori person on council for close to 20 years. I said until this term, Councillor Boss, with Councillor Forsyth here, and I suspect the netball helped her getting elected there. Councillor Hennebury talked about people not voting for a Māori candidate. I suggest that there may have been other reasons why many Māori didn't vote for that, because they may not have supported your party organisation that particular candidate was standing for. Certainly some have said that to me. So I don't think that argument necessarily holds water. And Councillor Chesterman talked about the difference between Asian people, who are also not represented in that sense on this council, and Māori, and certainly they were not First Nation status, unless perhaps you believe some of Winston Peters' statements about them coming from Taiwan. But in actual fact, Asians do not have the same population as Māori, and one of the important things that we've just heard recently is the Māori population in this community is slated to grow from 20 to 30% over the next couple of decades. It's a fast-growing area of our population which is not engaged with council. The practicalities of the situation show that with all the nice words we've had, the taumatas and the different advisors and the committees we've had and the meetings and the runanga relations we've had, they have felt less and less engaged. During my time in council, I've seen that happen. It's got worse and worse. So I think Councillor Bell's concept of a two-term involvement of Māori directly into council is one way of attempting to redress that imbalance and to get Māori more involved in the council. I think that we'll be able to review things during the course of that and see how that sort of involvement goes. It may not be the answer, but certainly what we've been trying in the last 12 to 15 years has not been the answer. You just have to look at the figures of Māori involvement in the elections, not just standing but also voting, as to see how disengaged they feel compared with the rest of the population. It is time to actually look at it a different way, and I think it's time for us to relinquish a couple of seats and do it the way that Councillor Bell has suggested.
Okay. Just before Councillor Mahoro, can I just ask a question, please? If Maori seats was a decision of this council, then, and this might be for the Deputy Chief Executive, we have contract arrangements currently in place up for review next year, which are, if you like, the substitute for that feedback and involvement. What is the intention of those contracts, or is that something the council would have to later decide?
The nature of those contracts are largely service level agreements, so that's paying for services, which is different to a governance relationship, which you're talking about. We talked at the last service evaluation about undertaking a review, so it would be my understanding that some of those would be resolved through that review process, but there likely still be some need for service level agreements.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Mahod.
Thank you, Worship. This is always an interesting topic of discussion because there is no right and there is no wrong in my opinion. And I find it very difficult sometimes to actually try and get a sense of where the City Council is going to the future, because the future of this council is going to be very much more and quite strongly involved with Maori participation. And I'd like to use the consideration that we have an agreement called the Joint Management Agreement with Tainui. And that is something that's been set in legislation with Tainui and the government. That will impact majorly upon this council, as many of us know, and many of us perhaps don't fully understand or realise what that is going to do for the future. And so I put that into perspective of also having been involved for nearly a quarter of a century, or probably a quarter of a century now. Oh yes, we have. Just got my 25 years up badge needed now. What I actually...
It's all right, Granny.
Granny, yes, exactly. I am a granny. But what I suppose I'm saying is that when I first got involved, and yes, I do recall us having a full-blooded Maori representative on this council, Pat Kayo, an outstanding woman who went on to regional council and everything else. One of the things I remember her saying so clearly to me is, I might be Maori, but she said, I'm not recognised and not representing the people here, because whatever I say, someone says, I'm not representing that particular hapu or that particular iwi or that particular anything else. And for her, it was extraordinarily difficult. I don't know that things have changed that much since then, to be truthful. What I do know is the world has turned round in a quarter of a century. And what I do know is that we cannot avoid having participation with Maori. My conundrum for today is, seeing this amendment, is would we preempt what I know is going to be a solid future with Maori by doing this now? Because would we be saying, hey, let's have two representatives, whoever they may be? Would the one be suburban, i.e. Runanga-based, Hamilton-based? Would one be Tainui affiliated? What is the situation? I don't know. And that is a lot of water to go under the bridge, I think, that we need to consider. So although I have always been and have strong affiliation with many Maori, I don't know that this is the right time to do this. So I suppose just for a final helping me make my mind up on what the right thing is to do, if we do this is the 2 years, it's in essence a trial. Reality is, it will become reality. We'll become used to it, become used to anything. If we don't go with the emotion, Anthony, can I ask you, when will we be coming back again to make this decision as a council? When will we have to, by law? Is it 6 years or 3 years?
Council can consider this at any time, but obviously if we went back to take effect at a next triennial election, it would be 3 years when we would have up to consider the right methodology in which to address it again. The council can consider it at any time, or anyone can demand a poll at any time.
Thank you. That helps me, and I am now going to say that I will be supporting the motion because I feel this isn't quite the right time for this to occur. Not because I don't wish it, I do wish it, but I also think that it may well be that we have to, as a council, and it's my challenge to us all, is we have to do some really strong work to say, if we're going to have representation, is it going to just be as is, or is it going to be representation that can be of real value to the people that the representatives will be supporting and speaking on behalf? So I think I will now confirm that I will go with the motion, although in fact my heart, I suppose, goes with the amendment because I really believe we should have my representation in the not-too-distant future.
Thank you, Councillor Hood. Right, any other councillors speaking for or against?
Just
just
Yes.
to write a reply in due
Yes, I
course.
think Councillor Forsyth, did you want to speak, and then I'll go to you, Councillor Gower.
Thank you, Worship. I feel a little bit betwixt and between because I totally understand and appreciate the reasons that Councillor Bell has put forward today and can see potential benefits and a real consultative process being put forward. But from my own experience, and I can only really talk on that, all my life I've always played on an even playing field, I suppose, on the same court, not only sports-wise but educationally and professionally as well. Never felt the need to say, but what about me, I'm Māori, I would like some special treatment here. I've always felt that you get the best people for the job with an all-out open process. So I think at the end of this, I will support the motion and not the amendment. The other difficulty too is that some could say, and as Pippa has alluded to, that sometimes the actual representation of Māori can be quite a difficult thing to nail down as well. I mean, my roots are from the East Coast, so some would argue that my perspective here is not local, it's not tangata whenua, it's not taunui, and therefore should I be counted as a Māori representative or not? So again, the argument is although it's a worthwhile one, I also think it's fraught with potential difficulties. And for the time being, again, taking my experiences into account, taking the public opinion through the citizens panel comments into account as well, I'll be supporting the motion.
Okay, right. Councillor Gower, final word?
Yeah, thank you, Worship. I move the motion over probably a philosophical point of view and not an emotive one. I come from the point of view that in New Zealand, everybody has the same opportunity. Now, whether they grasp that opportunity is over to that person. And I'll come on very briefly to that in a couple of seconds. People have heard me talk about Africa before when this debate has come up, when we had the apartheid. And then from the apartheid, we went to legislation because of discrimination. And I wandered around Africa, as most of you know, not in the tour party, and I saw the results of positive discrimination. And what I saw, quite frankly, horrified me. It was as bad as apartheid. And the very people that were supposed to protect, that didn't. I'll go on to probably my view is that the majority of citizens who I represent, most of us represent, probably would not favour Maori seats at this particular stage. I think there are other ways that we can actually have the views of Maori going into committees. We've talked about that before. Some of it I think we could do better. But that is a two-way street. I'm just not too sure whether in actual fact we're getting the right input from Maori that we actually require. And that's a shame. Somebody talked about the land confiscation under the Treaty of Waitangi. I was directly involved in the first land confiscation and getting back. That is a completely different issue from what we're actually talking about now. And I don't think the two can be compared. There possibly may be a poll as a result of this motion goes through. And that is covered by legislation. And be that it is a may. The other thing is that I'm very mindful at the moment. I'm working with two refugee families at the moment. They've come here with absolutely zero. Absolutely zero. And over the past year or so, I've actually seen them get themselves with very little help whatsoever And I can see some of those kids who English is a second language actually really climbing up the ladder. And they'll be scholars in their own rights, only because of their personal will to actually achieve something, and they've started off with much less than any of us have here whatsoever. So on the balance, I support the principles of open governance. I support the principles that everybody in New Zealand should have exactly the same opportunity. Now, while I'm saying that, I recognise in a Western democracy there will always be a set percentage in the community which we will have to help. And that's taken as read in any Western democracy. But notwithstanding that, everybody in New Zealand should have exactly the same opportunity, and that opportunity should not be divided between race, creed or colour. And that's a very strong stance that I believe. So, thank you.
Okay. All right, so we'll go to the board on the amendment. First, everyone's clear on what the amendment is. Do we need to read it back?
Yes, please.
Okay, can we have the amendment read?
Daphne's amendment.
Daphne, would you like to just read it for us then?
Yes, the Council introduces Maori representation for the next two triennial elections, 2013 and 16, noting electors' right to demand a poll on the matter.
Okay, thank you.
Lost 4-9 if you wish to.
Okay. Right, so we've got the motion now. Everyone wants to go to the board for the motion.
Carried 9-4 if you wish to.
Right, thank you. Right, councillors, that's a convenient time for morning tea, and we'll reconvene at 11:15. Thank you.
Hey, Gower, if you're involved in the first hospital.
The next item on the agenda is item 9, because we have our visitors here at 10:45. So that is the item at page 22, the Local Government Funding Agency, and we have with us Craig Stubbo and Jonathan Salter. Now, Matthew or Blair, are you speaking to that? So Blair will speak to the report first.
Thank you, Worship Councillors. Councillors, today this report is the continuation of a number of discussions you've had on the Local Government Funding Agency. And the purpose of today's report is to make a final decision on the participation in the Local Government Funding Agency. And the intention of the report, is, subject to your approval, is that delegation is given to the Chief Executive to complete the transaction of us actually subscribing and entering into the Local Government Funding Agency. So the LGFA, as we commonly refer to it, is at a point where it's ready to launch, and you'll hear from Craig, who's the interim chair of the entity that is essentially on the starting platform. The report specifically responds to the resolution that Council made on the 1st of June, which was following the annual plan meetings where you had gone out in consultation with this matter, and the resolution provided some very specific things in terms of Council's participation in the scheme, and also asked Council to receive back a final report on elements such as the documentation arrangements and the latest arrangements. And so that's the purpose of today's meeting. So Matthew's just going to briefly outline significant developments since June, and then Craig and Jonathan will outline both from the governance perspective of the new LGFA board, and Jonathan Salter representing all the 9 major councils as the solicitor for all of us, including Hamilton City Council, the legal considerations that have been reviewed by Simpson Gresson lawyers. So I'll hand over to Matthew just to briefly outline the major developments.
Your Worship, Councillors, as Blair's mentioned, there has been significant progress made in the last 4 months, I guess, since we last brought this to Council in June. That progress has been extremely pleasing. So I was just going to quickly run through 3 or 4 of the main items, 2 of which I will then just hand over to Craig and Jonathan separately to pick up on and delve a little more deeply. Just very briefly as well to introduce our guests by way of just a little bit of further background. So Craig Stobo as Chairman of the Interim Shadow Board for LGFA. I guess I just wanted to point out Craig has significant capital markets experience over many years, both in private sector and public sector. Also quite significant boardroom experience. He's currently chair of AMP New Zealand Office Trust and has a number of other directorships. So I may ask Craig to just elaborate on some of his background and experience as well. Jonathan Salter, a partner at Simpson Grierson, as Lee mentioned, have been engaged on behalf of the Type 9 councils who have really driven this to date and a well-known specialist in the local government sector, and he'll talk to some of the legal matters that are involved. So look, just by way of recap, the 3 or 4 major developments in the last 4 months or so. Significantly and very pleasingly, the enabling legislation was passed by the government, I think, around 6 weeks ago. I think significantly as well, they had cross-party support, so it really had a very straightforward passage through Parliament. And that was obviously a critical element to being able to set up and enable the LGFA. Jonathan will probably pick up on that. I think another significant development that has also been very pleasing, there's been no change to the intentions of the Type 9 councils in terms of their plans to participate as initial shareholders in LGFA. But what has been very pleasing is we, at this stage, have very strong intentions from a further 10 councils to also subscribe for capital at the initial launch of the LGFA. And obviously joining those 19 councils would be the Crown as well. So if anything, I would say relative to how we saw the entity being formed some 6 to 9 months ago, I think we're going to end up with a wider shareholder base from day one, which is very pleasing and talks to quite good coverage across the sector from day one. Those 19 councils, by way of example, represent nearly 3/4 of the outstanding debt across the local government sector. I guess the other key element that has made very good progress and very much driven by Craig, who became involved with the establishment board, I think some 4 or 5 months ago, has been the recent formation of a shadow board of directors who would assume the directorship role upon incorporation, and some of their work in recent months to pick up a very robust and detailed business plan exercise that's been undertaken for the LGFA, scrutinise that, add their insights, and get themselves to a point of comfort whereby they've been able to, when you have it attached, issue a draft statement of intent reflecting their belief in terms of the performance objectives they can deliver to in the first 2 to 3 years of the LGFA and some of the financial forecasts that go alongside that. Craig will pick up on those issues of the business plan and viability for LGFA in this discussion. Finally, obviously an awful lot of work is required to develop underlying legal agreements and deeds that are required to enable the LGFA structure and shareholding structure to be established, and that work is significantly progressed. I think Jonathan would agree we're probably at the 98 to 99% completion stage in terms of that documentation, and it's been just extremely helpful to be able to engage Simpson Grierson alongside the other 9 councils and work that process collectively. So I guess one of the items that Jonathan would reflect on is the documentation and agreements that have landed, the extent to which they are, virtually an exact match of the intentions of the structure that we went out and consulted with the public on. So there's been a lot of work to get to the point that we're at now. So that's just a recap on I guess the big ticket items where there's been really good progress made in the last 3 or 4 months. I'd like now to just hand over to Craig Stobo initially, and then Jonathan, just to paint their picture as well.
Thank you, Matthew. Your Worship, councillors, thank you very much for inviting me to speak. Happy to go through a brief outline as I see things today, and then take questions during what I say or afterwards. want to make sure you understand that this is your business. This is something you should be actively interested in because you will be a shareholder, a business owner of this vehicle. So the fact that I'm here today talking about it is great because it shows you've got interest in it and how it's going to work. A little bit more about my background. Born in North Otago, now living in Auckland, married, 3 children, Otago University, economics degree, a few years with government in the diplomatic corps and then into economic roles in investment banking and then running a funds management business in Auckland where we had to buy fixed income securities including local government debt. So I've been a buyer of government debt as an institution and in this new role I'm assuming a chairmanship of an organisation that's going to be issuing or selling local authority debt. So I'm on the other side but I understand how investors think and why I think this is a terrific vehicle for New Zealanders from a number of fronts. One is the main purpose of the vehicle is to put in place a capital structure, the way the business is organised, which gives you a much superior credit rating and drives lower interest costs for councils. So if you looked at all the 10-year plans of all the councils in New Zealand, roughly speaking, the total debt picture rises from about $5.5 billion to around $11 billion under current plans. So that's existing debt that has to be refinanced and new debt. That's an enormous amount of money that's going to be raised by the local government sector. So this vehicle was designed to try and improve your cost of borrowing. That's the main purpose of the vehicle. You're not reinventing the wheel here. This type of institution has already been developed and is in play and well used by capital market participants in, for example, British Columbia, but more importantly from my perspective in Scandinavia, where some of these vehicles in those countries that look after municipalities or local government have been going for decades. So we're not trying to create something new, but it's very definitely new for New Zealand. What it does mean is that your securities, your borrowing will take place largely through one vehicle, the local government funding agency. You still have options to use your existing business relationships, but over time I would expect that the LGFA will become your buyer of choice of your securities or the lender to you of choice. And that's certainly the intention of the board. The reason why the business model works is that if all local governments commit to using the vehicle, we can get scale. And if we can become a scale lender to the sector, we can drive down margins significantly and pay a dividend, albeit a capped dividend to shareholders, because the primary purpose of the vehicle is to lower borrowing costs, not to maximise shareholder returns. So you'll still get a dividend over the next 2 or 3 years. Bear in mind it's a start-up. The faster we get going, the faster we get scale, the faster we can pay dividends. So there's a start-up element which I think will be brief in the papers to you. In terms of risk management, just having a cup of coffee in the tea room with Councillor Chesterman, one of the issues that's important for you to understand is the risks of the vehicle. So if I could just, if you haven't been to it, turn you to page 11 or 12 actually of the slides in the back of the pack. Those go through some of the risks that we've thought about and how we try to mitigate those. So for a start, this is not a bank. So we don't have a balance sheet where we've got margins between borrowing and lending going on and it sits on a balance sheet. This is a model where we're matching assets and liabilities. So where you want to borrow money, we will aggregate that around New Zealand with other local authorities and match that and then package it and sell that to institutions and banks in New Zealand and overseas. So there's no balance sheet risk at all. There's not no, but there's reduced balance sheet risk. We're matching your borrowing with investors. We're not lending to you and letting that sit on our balance sheet and waiting for a time to go and refinance. So we're locking in a matched process. The second important thing is that we have the Crown sitting alongside you as a shareholder. The Crown has passed legislation and wants this development to occur, and they've also arranged for us to use the New Zealand Debt Management Office, which raises all the government's sovereign debt, as our middle and back office. So the New Zealand Debt Management Office will manage the tendering processes, the execution, the cash settlement, payments, cash flows for us, which substantially reduces risk and you've got the Crown sitting there as a operational partner and as a shareholder. The second level of protection is around the foundation policies, which shareholders have designed to make sure that the board cannot go beyond those policies without going back to shareholders. So there's a level of control that you have over that board. We, of course, have to report under normal processes as a CCO, including the statement of intent, reports. We have the Office of the Auditor General looking over our shoulder at the way we manage our accounts. Reports to you as shareholders through the newly devised Shareholders Council, which Matthew will be chairing. And you have a board of 6, 2 of whom are local government representatives. Paul Anderson from Christchurch Council, Mark Butcher from Auckland Council, and 4 independents. And those 4 independents that are proposed, and they are the Shadow Board, are myself, Abby Foote, who is based in Christchurch. She's currently Director of Transpower, and has been involved in many roles as a senior legal advisor in New Zealand and in the UK, and has startup experience. Phil Corey-Wright, formerly Corporate Finance Director for Macquarie in New Zealand, has been involved in debt and equity transactions, currently a Director of Southport, Auckland-based. John Avery, former Managing Director of Hesketh Henry, now a Director of a number of public and private institutions, including a former Director of the Warehouse, based in Auckland. And Paul Anderson, of course, I've mentioned, and Mark Butcher. So you have a range of skills and geographies which should be tapped into the needs of the sector, understanding what you need to do and how we can improve things over time, because this vehicle will evolve. The next layer after the board is the CEO, and the most important job that the board has is to appoint the CEO. We've been through a recruitment process, came to a short list of 3. We had a board meeting, shadow board meeting last Friday, and unanimously agreed on an executive. That person has verbally agreed with us that he wishes to join us. We have verbally agreed remuneration, and a terms of engagement employment package has been sent to him for checking and for hopefully assent. Now, if we can arrange that to happen over the next week or so, and that person can extract themselves from that organisation, we'll have a CEO on board at the beginning of December. That CEO will give you even more confidence about the strength and quality of the organisation. This person comes out of public sector finance. We've had applicants from New Zealand and overseas, so you should rest assured that that is a very strong appointment for us. In terms of process from here, following the CEO appointment, we will be seeking to incorporate the company, which is what the enabling legislation provides for us, around the end of next month. And as soon as that occurs, operational issues such as officers and further executives to assist the CEO, but we have a strong desire to try and get into the marketplace with our securities, packaging local government requirements as early as December. I can't promise you that because I don't have a signature on a piece of paper, but the shareholders that I've met and the incumbent shadow board members do want to go as soon as possible. In terms of just finally making sure we understand the business model, the reason why it works is because we've got commitments, including Hamilton City Council, around using us as their preferred vehicle of choice. So that and the other 8 local government foundation borrowers are all holding hands. We're going to drive scale in the vehicle. That scale of borrowing will drive down margins and will enable over time 2 or so 3 years for a capped dividend to be paid. So it's not a profit-making vehicle, it's a vehicle designed to lower your costs. So the risks, which I've outlined up on the board up here on page 12, tries to give you a sense of how we've tried to mitigate the risks. So your risks are you have a guarantee to the performance of this vehicle, and that has a recourse back to the ratepayer. But that guarantee is really a temporary one in the sense if a another local government entity faults, we'll arrange bridging of some kind until they're able to repay. Bear in mind, we can't find in New Zealand for sure, but even in overseas mature markets, an instance of a local government actually defaulting. It's a very, very rare event. We're not going to try and push the boundaries on that at all. I want you to make sure you understand the history. The operational risks, I think, are very low because we've got a matching process between borrowing and lending. We're not running a balance sheet. We've got very conservative policies in place, some of which I've mentioned before in terms of the foundation policies, which is the no-go area for the board. The board will have its own policies, but they must be within the foundation policies. And we hope as a result of the DMO, the Crown, the way we've set up the vehicle, that we will get a credit rating that is equivalent to the Crown's. So in Standard & Poor's terms, that's AA+, and Moody's terms, that's AAA. So the goal of the capital structure is to get that sort of credit rating. With that sort of credit rating, we can drive down interest costs on your behalf.
I wonder if, just to complete the picture, so perhaps we'll just complete the picture
Yes,
with
that's right, I
Jonathan
think.
and then move to questions.
Yes, I think that's right. Let's complete the presentation, then we'll have questions. So would you like to go, Jonathan?
Thank you, Your Worship. To introduce myself, but I've been around a long time advising local authorities, and in that long time, this thing has been tried before, twice. And once by NZ First Capital, so it was a sort of a commercial player in the market, and once by Civic Assurance. And it didn't work those times, and I think the thing to really take from this presentation is that in promoting this vehicle, the real lessons have been learned from why those things didn't work. And those lessons have been overcome in what's been proposed. And probably the two key things, one were, this time it's coming from local government. This is a collaborative exercise by local authorities, working together as a Type 9, the key players. Secondly, the Crown is in behind this in a really big way. That wasn't there before. And thirdly, it's predicated on commitment. So there is a buy-in that goes with the structure that assures the volumes that weren't there in the previous vehicles. This proposal itself has been around for a long time. It's been worked on for a couple of years, and with the key people from the Type 9, with representatives from Treasury. Our firm has been an advisor throughout that process, as well as the commercial advice from Asia Pacific and Cameron Partners. So there's been a real brains trust working on this for a long time, and it has taken a long time to get to the point that it's at. But along that way, there's been real buy-in, and I think probably the best manifestation of that is the government's commitment to it, which is manifested one way in the Local Government Borrowing Act 2011, which I'll just take you through some key provisions in because it's fundamental to why this is a very strong structure. But also in the government's commitment as shareholder and its commitment to make available the DMO, but also whilst it's not guaranteeing it, it is committing to making available funding in certain circumstances, and the legislation provides for that. So this is different in kind from anything that's gone before it. It has a completely different strength to it. I should say in the most recent phases, there has been an added important player in the Brains Trust, and that is that the LGFA as a sort of a establishment entity has been advised by Russell McVeigh, so they have been having independent legal advice to build the documents and the structure, and our role on behalf of the councils as shareholders has been to review that legal work. So there's an added level of, if you like, security around how the documentation has been completed. If I can just refer you to the Local Government Borrowing Act, that was enacted last month. And it does some pretty important things. It applies to the LGFA, for a start, it gives statutory recognition to this thing called the LGFA. It applies some exemptions to it, which puts it, in some respects, on the same footing as a local authority where that's beneficial. For example, the Securities Act applies to the funding agency in the same way it would apply to a local authority, so that means it's got some quite significant exemptions that the private sector don't enjoy. It also allows for the fact that it will be a council-controlled organisation and probably or possibly a council-controlled trading organisation. And whilst there are limitations on lending to a council-controlled trading organisation in the Local Government Act, and equally prohibitions on guaranteeing a council-controlled organisation, to the extent that this entity is that thing, a CCTO, those prohibitions and those restrictions don't apply. So it's actually, in effect, mandated the guarantee by making it authorised, irrespective of whether this thing is a CCTO. It also gives it the advantage quite clearly of being able to borrow in foreign currency, and it also exempts some of the downstream from that in terms of incidental arrangements from being prohibited. So there's areas where, in the nature of arrangements that the shareholding councils may have with the LGFA, they are not caught by any of the prohibitions on borrowing in foreign currency. It also makes any of your arrangements with the LGFA protected transactions under the Local Government Act, which is a very positive thing in terms of assuring the security or the validity of them. And finally, and importantly, there is express provision here authorising the Crown, in certain circumstances, to provide financial, to lend money in certain circumstances. So that's another really strong backstop in terms of your risk scenario, because the sorts of things that might trigger your risks, many of those will be covered by there being a first call on the Crown. The Crown's not guaranteeing anything, but it is acknowledging that it can make available financial accommodation in certain circumstances. So it's a very powerful piece of legislation. It lasts for 10 years on the basis that, I guess, the government, any government wants to know this thing is going to work, rather than trying it forever. I think that the point would be that if it is working and it doesn't need this legislation, the legislation would expire. If it is working and it does need this legislation will be extended. If it's not working, I guess the legislation will just expire. But that's not the contemplated outcome. In terms of there is a summary of the legal issues that is in your package of materials. In terms of the actual structure, I don't know how much I can meaningfully describe to you in a few moments. None. Appendix A, which is that picture, is it. So there you go, that's how it works. It does describe the documentation to give effect to that, and if you have issues with that, we'll try to answer your questions. Perhaps more pertinently is how do you as a local government, local authority get to the starting gate? Well, the answer to that is the decision you made back in June has got you, I would say, 95% of the way there. It basically, through your consultation processes in conjunction with your annual plan, you have the mandate to be a shareholder. That was the mandatory consultation requirement. You've crossed that bridge. You've got the answer to that. There were also some incidental amendments that were made through that process to your liability management policy and your investment policy. That really is belt and braces stuff. It's just making sure that what your policies currently say, your statutory policies, accommodate your involvement in LGFA, and that's all square. Also, in the course of that decision making, there was a commitment to accept the utilisation expectation of the LGFA, and in fact what you resolved on that is slightly more than the LGFA is asking for, because utilisation commitment is not 80% of all borrowing, it's 80% of long-term borrowing and only for the first 3 years. So you've more than mandated your ability to make that decision. So really the only things left to do, you did confer the delegations that would be required, but subject to this report back process, which is what you're having at the moment. Yes, you are in a position, subject to your questions and any issues that may come up, to make the final 5%, which is to mandate the relevant people to execute the documents that are necessary to make the thing happen. Probably best just to wait for questions now.
Right, okay, thank you. So I think I have Councillor Hennebury first, and then the Deputy Mayor, then Councillor Gower.
Okay, thank you for that. Thank you for your presentation. Anything that can save us some money I'm looking at, but my real concern is the decision that this council makes and has made to go further has consequences maybe for our ratepayers. And we actually, I don't know whether we've actually asked the ratepayers properly, and that concerns me. And one of my concerns is, and my question's coming to it, in what's been happening with earthquakes, tsunamis, broken gas pipes, defaults in large companies with some very respectable directors. One, even Sir somebody or other maybe. And you're asking us to say, well, trust us, we've got a great board, we know what we're doing. So my question to you is, we've talked about risk, and one of my questions is where I see here that the government is not actually guaranteeing this at all. It's a 20% shareholder with a $5 million deposit. Do I take it then that our holding funds is then 25 million because 20% is 5, so therefore the whole, being 100%, is 25 million holding funds? Is that yes. How I see it, or is that a lesser figure because it's the government?
Yes, so the capital structure, you're correct, Council, the capital structure is the government will be a $5 million shareholder, and at this stage, on current indications, there will be a further amounts from the Type 9 and the next 9 to 10 off the rank, indicating we'll have around about $26, $27 million of paid up capital, but there's a further 20 million of unpaid that can be called.
My next question then...
Can I step in there? Your question reminded me of something I really wanted to add to the mix, which was the other key feature of the structure is that it builds on local government's greatest security asset, and which distinguishes local government from anybody else in the marketplace, and that is rates. And it's always been the case for local authorities that your fundamental security for borrowing is your rates income and your rates revenue. Now that's enshrined in the structure. Everybody has to have the same security, which is rates revenue. Now that means that your ultimate security, there's an upside and a downside to this, but the big upside is that effectively the ultimate security of this entity is the ability to rate all of New Zealand. So that is a massive security and is recognised in the marketplace as one of the reasons this thing gets the sorts of treatment that it does, favourable treatment that it does. I guess the downside is that if the worst case happens, and it hasn't happened in living memory, that there is a default. Now, leaving aside all the other mechanisms that would be called first, the ultimate mechanism is your ratepayer. So you're absolutely correct about that, and that, I guess, is the downside. But it's no different from what it is now, except that you have the positive and the minus of sharing that with everybody else in the game, except that you've got more protections against that happening than you've had in the past.
Okay. Now, look, governments guaranteed banks in the past. You're saying there's a guarantee or a mandate for a guarantee?
Not from the government.
Okay, sorry, I heard.
It's
the way it's set, John said, the way it's set up, that there's a mandate of some guarantee.
Well, it's not that. It's the mechanism to provide short-term funding if it's required.
So I'd like to expand on that. So there is a facility that will commence at around $500 million, going to $1 billion, subject to funds that are, or debt that is raised, that we have available to us. We call it liquidity line, line of credit with the government, which we can use.
So we'll call it. Yeah. So you say lend money in certain circumstances. What would those circumstances be?
To local authorities?
Yes.
So at the moment, we are seeking commitments of up to 80% of funding of 1 year or more. You will, I expect, continue to have arrangements with your existing banks for funding of less than 1 year, and for the balance between 80 and 100%. We also have in place a series of proposed lending guidelines which ensure that we go through a series of checks to make sure local authorities comply with those. So absent those local authorities who have credit ratings of A or better, there are a number of financial covenants that local authorities have to jump through, which relates to total debt, relates to interest coverage relative to your rates, revenue, etc. And those covenants are part of the foundation policies that all shareholders wish to have in place, so that we have an early warning system in place.
It's like a debt ratio.
Correct. So we have an early warning system in place to make sure that if under a 10-year plan scenario there is a deterioration in those covenants, we'll want to have a discussion with that council about their ability to fund through us.
So if we didn't keep our debt ratio as the Hamilton City Council, we would be penalised.
Well, if you've got a credit rating, which you have,
yes. Yeah, but we also have some
downgraded credit
rating credits, our own internal policies.
Yes.
My question is then, if we break our own policy, does that mean you're going to step in and say, look, we want more interest from you? Or how are you going to trigger? How are you going to monitor this? Because I've got a suspicion that a lot of the councils in the country will start tripping on with their debts that they have. So how are you as a board going to trigger this? And how are you going to answer the question? Are you going to call on that liquidation, the government's $1 billion in certain circumstances?
No.
Or are you just going to raise more money?
No. Bearing in mind we're not a bank, we're simply matching assets and liabilities. So the early warning system is able to be focused on, because the wonderful nature of the local government sector is its transparency. Your 10-year plans, your annual plans, your audits that take place are available for us to look at. So we will know well in advance of an issue, and we'll have to sit down and talk with you. So one of the key executives that our CEO will employ is an analyst, for want of a better word, who will be having discussions around the credit quality of councils. And one of the similarities of what we're trying to do here, but we're doing it better, is to make sure that we're as strong as the weakest link, which I think is what you're driving to. So we have to make sure that everyone who is a guarantor and a borrower through this structure is able to meet those covenants, which are quite strict.
Now, in our case, we've $2.5 million to put in place, but I noticed reading the fine print that there will be no actually dividend paid out for a settling in period. So we'd have to cover the interest on our own $2.5 million for a while. And my question then to as our financial deputy chief executive, that will probably go in this annual plan that we're doing, so that's accounted for, is it?
It'll be factored into the long-term plan, but I think you'll also note that the report talks that the dividend, when it is paid, will cover back those early from the start, Councillor. So we will take account of that in our long-term plan.
So we have an upfront cost to this before we start, obviously. Yep.
There's a phase-in period, but the cost is repaid back when the dividend stream starts.
So just one thing that rattles in my ear, and that's my last question, Your Worship, is bearing in mind that the audit people have audited us. We and all councils supply material and are audited on that material supplied, and we get clean bills of health. It doesn't always trigger what you're wanting triggered, and that is alarm bells. Because it's an unqualified audit, and we've had that for the last 10 years, this council.
I think, though, your query around the ratios drives to the heart of the future. Audits tend to look to the past. So the 10-year plans are our prime document for assessing deterioration and credit quality, and that's a very transparent process. So I'm quite comfortable that we can manage that early warning system. The conversation with an errant council of course, will be difficult because they will not be able to fund for us. And that is a signal, I think, to the rest of the marketplace that something is wrong. So with all the eyes and ears looking in at that council, why would they ever go there? I find it very difficult to understand politically why they'd want to do that. We're another set of eyes that will be zeroing in on councils that don't adhere to the covenants.
But I've just,
Okay, one
on
more.
my computer is just here. I could just
Yes.
ask it, Your Worship, because then my concerns are relieved. Councillors proposing to participate in the LG. I'm reading it from my computer here. Sorry, so bear with me. It's number 11 on Simpson Greason's part, item 11, and it talks about LGF structure. And those councillors who do not propose to hold an ordinary share in it will still be required to execute or to proceed to the, which is note subscription agreement or guarantee if they're borrowing in excess of 20 million, and certain security stock certificates. As a council, how will they do that? How will the TAs do that? Stock certificates. Or is this legal jargon? I don't know.
Well, those are just the suite of documents that every borrower
Okay,
will
so
have to
just
enter into.
generic.
Yeah.
Standard borrowing document.
And with the exception of the guarantee, which is, well, the stock certificates that would exist now, the other two are simply a reflection of how the structure works.
I wonder if it's worth just someone answering that there are going to be different classes of people who will work through the LGFA. Those who are shareholders, those who borrow, who are not a shareholder, but once you borrow. So I don't, Matthew, Craig, whether you might just want to briefly expand on that point.
Yes, councillors. So I think the most important distinction is there's a group that have come up early, and in a sense they are the underwrite group, and we are in that group. So we have determined with a number of our colleague councils that we're prepared to be lead sponsors and take a certain underwrite role, if you like, and that's what the agreement to commit to utilise the vehicle for a certain percentage of our funding for the next 3 years, and the agreement to become initial shareholders to the level that we're considering is what captures that underwrite position. Underneath that, you will really have councils that are reasonably large in their own right, reasonably large borrowers. They may not decide to become shareholders. To some extent, the fact that there has already been a group that has led the process reduces that requirement on them. However, where they are very clearly captured and treated the same is to the extent that they have outstanding borrowings with the LGFA in excess of 20 million, they must automatically be a party to the guarantee. So then by default, you can imagine there would be a handful of smaller councils who could just maintain a relationship with LGFA over time, which would not be dissimilar to the relationship they would have with their own bank.
So with the same borrowing interest rates, or do they pay higher because they're not actually part of the guarantee body?
Yes, so there's a proposed tiered structure for those, beginning with what we would call prime borrowers, which will be at our cost of raising funds, and then we'll tier above that for councils that have lower credit ratings or worse bank cover, still within the guidelines, but worse. So we are going to differentiate.
Because there's one or two small councils on that list that, of the other outside the 9, are in a very vulnerable position.
Okay. Deputy Mayor.
Yes, thanks, Your Worship. Probably some of the questions have been answered, but I'd like to ask them in my own way. Matthew mentioned that there were 10 more councils coming on board, but I just need to establish, is that 10 on top of the 19 or 10 on top of the 9?
On top of the 9.
On top of the 9. So there are 19 councils participating. Were you sort of happy with that level of interest? I mean, it does seem a bit low to me in comparison to the numbers of local authorities in New Zealand.
Yes, I agree with you. The numbers are something like as follows: tight 9 plus what we're increasingly calling the loose 10, so call it 19. Then on top of to add to that, there's a total of about 49 that have expressed interest but can't get in the first round because their consultation process was not as expeditious as yours. So they'll probably come in around June next year, the next round, as potential shareholders. But there are 79 councils in New Zealand, some of which may not want to come in because they're not borrowers.
Right.
Some are coming in as shareholders, though. Bay of Plenty, Western Bay of Plenty. Environment Bay of Plenty are coming in as a shareholder but not as a borrower, and they just see it as a wonderful vehicle that they want to support. So there's a number of different drivers from different councils. We don't expect to get all councils because some just aren't borrowers.
Okay, so that led to the next question was the ability of those that haven't been able to go through that consultation process. So you will be able to bring those new councils over the next X number of months to become shareholders in the agency.
Yes, that's correct.
Because Councillor Henry was asking some questions around borrowing. So I just wanted to establish clearly in my mind, the agency will lend not only to its shareholding councils on the criteria as you've outlined, but it will also lend to any other council, even though they are not shareholders in the agency. Is there any margin on, because the dividend could be said to be the reward for the investment, but that may take a couple of years to get to the point when dividends are declared. So is there any margin for those who are not shareholders to borrow compared to those that invest the money?
Yes. To answer your question, yes. So there's a tiering of those who are shareholders but not borrowers, those who are shareholders and borrowers, and those who are borrowers but not guarantors, those who borrow less than 20 mil don't have to be a party to the unconditional guarantee. The way the credit process will work will be driven effectively initially off credit ratings. So the strongest councils have the prime margin that we can pass on, and then the tiering will occur in plus 10, plus 20, plus 30 basis points. Still significantly better than what those councils could get if they were to borrow in the market directly.
So it'll still be cheaper for the shareholder than for the council that doesn't want to invest but wants to borrow. There will be a margins.
In principle, yes. But I just want to make sure we understand the purpose of the vehicle. The purpose of the vehicle is not to create a high return on capital for shareholders. The main purpose of this vehicle is to drive down margins for all councils. So what we want to do as an initial founding group is make it as appealing as possible for all the other councils to come in, because volume will drive down margins for everybody. So it's a cooperative structure.
Okay. The next point that Councillor Henry also asked, there is an additional call on capital, is that correct?
There is an uncalled component of $20 million, that's correct.
So this council could end up, as we did a year ago with the airport, with a call-up of $6 million, which wasn't planned. So what's our likely call-up? It's $2 million or $2.5 million? In what period of time? Like 3 years' time? I'm just thinking of the financial planning aspect from a council's point of view.
Your Worship, Councillor, there is no embedded intention in the business plan for that unpaid portion to be called. So it sits there as a contingency, and it is a bucket for the board to go to if they believe they have the need. But the business plan on which which is reflected in the statement of intent and on which the business has been built doesn't reflect any requirement that, we will be coming back to you for the unpaid.
But there is a possibility of another couple of million.
Yes, there is.
See, I suppose that if you took the airport situation, we never expected to have to pay that. And then suddenly with the debt and the downturn in the aviation sector, it was called up. So you've answered that for me. In terms of your ability to invest in high quality securities, I'm now talking about, the risk, and we have a new, as from this afternoon, a new measurement. It's called the V8RF. That's the V8 risk factor, which we apply to all financial decisions as from 1 o'clock. You've talked about the risk, but in the worst case scenario, what is the risk for the Hamilton City Council? apart from the capital that's invested. If the agency went broke, and I don't know why it would, but, you know, these are the surprises that we've got to ask questions around. The worst case scenario, imagine what that might be. You tell me what that might be, and just say, what is the exposure to the Hamilton ratepayer?
Could we bring up slide 13 or subsequent slide to that, if it's possible, on the screen? Bring it up. So this is the hierarchy, Councillor, Your Worship, that you're really referring to. So there's the initial 25 million, call it 25, approximately $25 million that foundation shareholders have something up with. There's the uncalled capital. So that's the tiering of cash that we would draw down in the event that we had to fund a local government that didn't repay its loan on maturity. That's the risk that we're talking about, because we only lend to local authorities. We don't lend to anybody else. So if a local authority does not pay us on maturity, we can draw down these sources of cash, our establishment capital, our uncalled capital, the borrower notes, and then these other sources, which a little bit technical, but I can just go through them. So when we arrange funding for local authorities, we'll actually borrow 10% more than we need and put that into high quality A plus type securities, basically government treasuries, reserve bank bills, or very high quality bank bills. And even then it's restrictive. We have the standby line of credit with the Crown that Jonathan mentioned earlier on, up to $1 billion that we can draw down. And then actually we can sell our assets, which is the securities that you've sold to us, your loans. We can actually sell those in the marketplace or to the Reserve Bank. We have an agreement with the Reserve Bank where we can discount those with a haircut of about 6 or 8%. We really need the cash. And then the last bullet point, which is where you come in, is the guarantee from your ratepayers, which is limited to your contribution to as a percentage of your rates revenue as a percentage of the total rates revenue guaranteed by the other local government borrowers.
If I can chip in there, one thing that's not on that slide is that in respect to the defaulting council, the receiver can come in and assess rates. So it ought to be a short-term problem because the exercise of the security document and the security entitlements will be that the rates eventually get collected.
I think that's a key point that Jonathan's just made there. So at the moment, in our borrowing, we have what we call a debenture trust deed, which is effectively a security against all our rates that anyone who lends us money, if we default, they can appoint a liquidator who can come in and levy rates on our ratepayers to repay that loan. So that we already have that in place, and that's provided on any debt that we issue. So what Jonathan's just outlined there is of another council who's borrowed through this vehicle, who defaults, and of course any council that borrows this must have in place a debenture trust deed. So one first action that the LGFA will take will be immediately working with that particular council and the receiver or liquidator to get that charge against their rates activated. And so as Jonathan has said, it would be a timing issue, and I think that's the issue here, that the LGFA will be seeking to recover against that council, against their ratepayers, that debt. And so that would be a situation, an extreme situation, but it's the same level of risk surety that we give now to anyone who lends money to us.
Sorry, just one last question. This is like the privatisation question. At some point in the future, could this funding agency be sold off to XYZ Bank?
I hope this vehicle will be part of our capital markets for 50, 100, 200 years. So that's my thinking, but I'm one voice on the board, but I don't own the company. The company, the CCO, is owned by shareholders, which local authorities. You will have to make that decision.
Okay. One of the consequences of that were to occur is that some of the provisions of the legislation would unwind. So it would be a big call.
Okay. Councillor Gow.
Thank you. I did have a number of questions, quite a few of them have been answered. Page 41, number 30, I think, has been addressed for me. Just looking at page 52, forgive my ignorance here, especially under governance 7 and shareholders council and the board. How is the board actually elected? It just doesn't seem to come out with you.
The foundation group of shareholders put in a process using an external HR recruitment agency who specialises in director search, and asked them for sets of names, and those names went back to Matthew's shareholder council group, and those named in conjunction with the Crown were recommended.
And in future?
Now these are effectively in place because the entity doesn't exist, of course, so we can't elect anyone. We don't have anything. It's like candy floss.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I just can't find it.
All right, okay.
Within the
So the process went through with a due diligence process with an external HR recruitment agency, came up with the right names, passed by the Crown, back to the Shells Council for approval, and you get to re-elect those people in the normal course of events as CCO, and in fact you can take directors off at any time.
Okay, that's good. The other question is regarding withdrawal from the scheme. If and I don't think that's if we do go, if we will, I can't imagine we will. And I'm saying that because, as I understand, this identity has actually probably driven down some of the costs already, with some indications that the market has actually taken notice of some of this. And correct me if I'm wrong there. Now, what about how would we withdraw from the scheme if we wanted to? And I just can't get that out of the documents here.
So you would cease issuing through the council, through the LGFA, and once you had repaid your maturing debt, at that point you are only liable as a guarantor at that point in time for the LGFA's liabilities. So that guarantee continues after you have repaid the LGFA and until the last loan that was outstanding by the LGFA at the point at which you've repaid all your debt, including.
So we're pretty captured into it.
You can, well,
that's probably the wrong word.
Yeah, if, Your Worship Councillors, if you thought about the average maturity level of the council being 5 years, then at the end of that process, provided you had repaid all your debt at the beginning of that process, you could think about it as a 5-year commitment where you're not using it, but you're still up to the guarantee.
Thank you.
I might just have some questions, and then I'll go to Councillor Westphal and Councillor Forsyth. Just on page 25, in regard to the councils, the Type 5 and your loose 10, Waikato Regional Council and Waikato District Council, what's their status in terms of this? Are they part of the 49 that have expressed an interest?
Your Worship, I'm not sure that I can precisely answer that. I mean, I'm just not sure what interest they've indicated. But, I mean, in terms of our neighbouring councils at the moment, we have Waipara and Oklahoma with strong intentions.
Yes,
in terms of the other 10. I think I'd be reasonable in reflecting that with the regional council, as they don't borrow, I would be surprised if they haven't flagged that they don't have an interest. I do know that Waikato District Council have been considering it, and look, I can't confirm it, but my hunch would be that they would be one of the 49 who have intentions to work it through their LTP.
Okay, I think it was that you, Craig, said that another 49 councils had expressed an interest, so I'm assuming that you knew who made up that 49.
Yeah, I should have that information in front of me. I don't have that at the moment. That 49 includes the first 9 and the next 10.
Yeah, okay, plus. In respect of the criteria, just picking up on Councillor Henneberry's point, there are some local authorities in New Zealand that are not in good shape financially, and they're primarily the smaller councils. Does your criteria, could a consequence of applying your criteria mean that some local authorities may not be able to come in?
Yes, we've modelled, on the current 10-year plans, we've modelled councils' breach of those covenants.
Right.
So we understand on current plans, and bear in mind they will change.
Yes.
So the answer is yes.
Right. Just looking at the analysis done from Asia Pacific Risk Management at page 57, just interested in the top of that page, they talk about the contribution that our council has made. We're one of the Type 5, but it goes on to say that that figure could reduce if other non-Type 9 councils join in. Now, I just want you to walk us through that, because I'm reading that means that we may not have to put as much in, or we may get some money back, or in simple terms, what does that mean?
Your Worship, that is really just talking to the numbers that are going to need to be crunched very shortly as the 9 and the other 10 confirm their participation, and there'll be a magic transaction on a specific day, which is the final subscription transaction. There is a decision to be made at that point, as with any initial share offering, as to whether over-subscriptions are accepted or whether a scale back is utilised.
Right.
And I would probably have to, and that would sit with the Shadow Board, I think, primarily to make that call. This is just suggesting exactly what you picked up. If amongst the other 10, 80 to 90% of those come in, then there's every likelihood that if the board were happy to scale back and lock in their capital at 25 million, we would be probably looking at closer to 2 rather than 2.5.
Right. So we will know that in due course.
Correct.
But put another way, our contribution won't be any more than 2.5 million.
And it can't be.
Can't be, yep. Okay. I'm just interested in the, I'm just finding my bit of paper. A shareholders council group is being established, and that's set out in the page 53. It's part of the statement 10. I'm just interested in that, and this will, I guess, be for you, Matthew. So that is, you're appointed as our council's representative. You've been in on this since day one. That's right, isn't it? Okay. So is there a process by which appointments are made to that shareholders council group? And if so, what is that process?
So, Your Worship, the approach is rather similar to the Shadow Board. So, for the purposes of launch and initial incorporation, embedded in the documentation will be the representatives. So, as for the Shadow Board, we're looking to establish with our individual councils, and the shape of that shareholder council would be 9 representatives, either from the Type 9 or perhaps 7 of the 9, because Auckland and Christchurch are represented on the board, so there's just 1 or 2 discussions occurring there at the moment. Plus the Crown. The Crown will have a representation on the Shareholders' Council as well. So we have a start-up and initial launch context around the business. That gives rise, I guess the driving criteria has been that there have been 9 experienced officers involved in a very constructive process with very good skill sets, and we're looking for just to retain that continuity and have that body retain really tight scrutiny on the performance of the company and the board, and those officers have somewhat of a vested interest in looking to do that in a robust way. So the driver at the moment, I guess you could say, is around continuity and representation from those councils who have the most at stake. It would then, and it's contemplated in the shareholders' agreement, that the normal rotation situation would kick in. So June 13 is the first annual date where we would look for rotation. I would add that I think as we move beyond 10 to 20 and we get up into the 30s and 40 councils, I think there might be scope for other criteria such as geographic representation and those sorts of issues to be the sort of stuff that the shareholder council, in terms of its composition, needs to get its head around.
Because of numbers, it would just get too unwieldy.
Yes. Can I just add to that? Sorry, Your Worship, and some very good insight and advice from Simpson Grierson. It is, for all intents and purposes, a club. It's representing a group of shareholder interests to keep good coordination, but it is not a CCO in its own right. It won't vote for that purpose, actually, to ensure that it remains effectively a club that is not captured as a CCO in its own right. So there is a degree of informality alongside a degree of institutional.
So I'm really just interested in accountability back to this council. That's what I'm interested in here, and this is where I'm focusing on because this is our accountability line, if you like. So just on that, so what I'm hearing is in June there's a discussion, so our council here, like any of the other Type 5 or Type 10, whatever it ends up being, has to confirm our represented person on that group, and that's an annual process, am I right? That's going to be an annual process, right? And in terms of the points set out under the role in the statement of intent, fine with those, that's good. What I'm interested in, and I didn't read it in the report, was what is the process for you as our representative reporting back to us as the shareholder about these things and seeking guidance from us? What's that process? I don't see it.
No, and Your Worship, I think, to be frank, it hasn't been contemplated exactly what that process is as yet, and that will be for us internally to decide. But broadly speaking, what is embedded in the statement of intent in the discussions with Craig's shadow board is that there would be a flow of quarterly reporting coming from the company so that the shareholder council can have the benefit of that information. And the intention of the shareholder council will be, as a group, to consider the information and in turn make good summary information and any required advice available to the respective governing council.
Right, so in due course for this council, you will bring something forward to us that tells us what that process will be for us just to confirm off, because it's vis-a-vis you and us, yes, as opposed to you and the debt.
Yes, I believe that we would bring that through to the Finance and Monitoring Committee, and we will certainly bring an outline of that reporting process.
Right, okay. Just another thing then, and if the Type 9 becomes the Type 10, 12, 15, subject to what your board says, does that in any way affect what you were saying about the dividend policy on page 52?
No.
Does that change the landscape?
Well, the dividend policy, which contemplates payment to shareholders of our cost of funds, the LGFA's cost of funds plus 200 basis points, the payment of that dividend will start earlier, a larger the borrowing through the LGFA. So it's all driven by volume of lending. So the sooner we get people in, and the sooner we get borrowing, the greater the chance we can commence dividend payments.
Okay. Check if there was anything else. Right? Considered it.
We're aware
yourselves as to whether you need to keep that in reserve
Yes.
in case the LGFA doesn't work out. Those sorts of business issues you need to think about.
Yes, so am I right then that potentially the individual council's credit rating may be less important than this agency's credit rating because this is our borrowing vehicle?
So I think that will be a matter of time,
Yes.
Your Worship, as you get more comfortable, councils get more comfortable with the vehicle's delivering what it should deliver.
Yes.
We have a credit assessment policy which takes into account credit ratings of borrowers, so having that there helps us understand.
A layer of...
It's
so
not just,
we get benefits from that.
Yes, Your Worship. So it won't be just us looking at you, but I suspect all the other guarantors will be interested in HCC's progress. So you'll have...
As their upper limits in terms of policy. So,
Yes.
so we as a council will automatically have to fall into line as we are talking to you about at the current time.
Okay. And just the final thing on your slide 13, I just want to confirm that I've read and heard you right, that the last option
take a 6 months of liquidity first before coming to the guarantors for contribution from their ratepayers.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. Now I've got Councillor Westphal, Councillor Forsyth, Councillor Boss and Councillor O'Leary.
There were a couple, my questions were around some of the ones that you raised, Your Worship. First of all, with the Shareholders' Council, Your Worship, this question is actually to you. Was your line of questioning getting at the possibility that an elected member could become a member of that council?
No, I was more interested in skill because it is holding what is a highly competent and in a complex arena board to account in some respects. So skill to me.
And given you have told us that the purpose of this vehicle is not to make money, how's the board going to control that, the remuneration of directors?
Sure.
I mean, and the question after that would be, if we as a council thought that you were paying your directors excessive amounts, how could we influence that?
That's right. Thank you for the questions. Just a point of clarification, it's an organisation whose assessed by to other CCOs, and if I can be absolutely transparent, the remuneration for directors is as follows: $75,000 for the chairman and $35,000 for directors. That's been set and has been in consultation with the Shareholders' Council